Late evening. Las Vegas no longer shouts. It hisses. Neon buzzes unevenly. Air conditioners cough warm breath onto the sidewalk. Somewhere far off, a taxi horn cuts the dark and disappears. Dean Martin doesn't leave through the front doors of the casino. No entourage, no spotlight, no smile rehearsed for strangers. Just a man stepping into the night, shoulders slightly heavy, tie already loosened, fame left behind the glass doors. Then he hears it. Not from a radio. Not drifting out of a bar. Not polished. Not safe. From the sidewalk. A voice, raw, uneven, almost damaged, singing his song. But not the version the world knows. Not the version that made him famous. The melody limps. The tempo drags. The voice sounds like it has lost a fight with time and kept singing anyway. Dean slows, takes one step, then another, and stops. Because this doesn't sound like a tribute. It doesn't sound like imitation. It sounds like the song never belonged to him at all. He doesn't know yet that this accidental moment will undo someone else's carefully buried past. And he has no idea that before the night is over, it will quietly dismantle everything he believes about success, ownership, and what it actually costs to be heard. Let us know where you're watching from, and we hope you enjoy the story. He heard the song before he saw the man. It drifted through the late afternoon air of Las Vegas in a way that felt wrong, too slow, too stripped, as if someone had taken a familiar shape and bent it slightly out of alignment. The street was alive with its usual clutter, distant engines idling at a stoplight, the hollow whoosh of conditioned air spilling from casino doors, a dry wind dragging dust along the pavement, and through it all, that voice. Dean Martin stopped without meaning to. Not abruptly, no sudden halt that would draw attention, but the subtle pause of a man whose body reacts before his mind catches up. He knew the melody as well as his own breathing. He'd sung it hundreds of times, under lights, behind microphones tuned to forgive every flaw. But this version refused forgiveness. The tempo lagged. The phrasing stumbled. Whole breaths were missing where they should have been generous and smooth. At first, it sounded like incompetence. Then Dean noticed the pauses weren't random. They were measured, careful. The singer wasn't losing the song. He was rationing it. The man stood near a wall stained by decades of heat and exhaust, his coat too heavy for the hour, his posture guarded, as if leaning forward might cost him something he couldn't afford. His voice lacked polish, but it carried weight. Each line arrived slightly bruised, pushed out with effort, then released into silence before the next one dared to follow. A couple passing by slowed, exchanged glances, and smirked. Someone laughed under their breath. A coin arced lazily through the air and clinked against the open case at the singer's feet. The sound was sharp, metallic, too loud for how little it meant. The singer didn't look down. Dean noticed that too. No nod. No flicker of gratitude or irritation. The man's eyes stayed fixed somewhere beyond the street, unfocused, as if the audience existed only in memory. He wasn't performing at people. He was enduring the song. That was when it became clear. This wasn't a man who couldn't sing properly. This was a man who once could, and now physically couldn't do it the old way. The shortened phrases, the lowered key, the way he reshaped the melody around what his lungs would still allow. These were compromises learned through loss, not laziness. Dean shifted his weight, letting the crowd thin around him. He felt strangely exposed standing there, anonymous and unrecognized, listening to his own work sound like something else entirely. Not entertainment. Not nostalgia. Something closer to testimony. Then came the second verse. Dean's attention sharpened. Most singers skipped it live. It was awkward, less melodic, written for a younger voice with more patience than most audiences had. Yet the man on the street knew it, not approximately, not guessed. He knew where the words hesitated, where the rhyme bent. He sang it as if it mattered more than the chorus ever had. That detail landed harder than the rough notes. A fan would have rushed the famous lines. A drifter might have mangled the structure. But this was familiarity earned the long way. Studio hours, rehearsals, a life once organized around breath control and timing. The wind picked up, carrying the last note away before it could settle. The singer stood still, chest rising unevenly, waiting for the next line to arrive inside him. Dean didn't clap. He didn't step forward. He didn't smile. He stayed. And in the quiet that followed, thin, uncomfortable, unfinished, the man on the street felt it. His voice faltered for the first time, not from weakness, but from the sudden awareness that someone was truly listening. The pause between verses stretched longer than the song required. Not because the singer wanted drama, there was none in his posture, but because his breath demanded it. He lowered his head slightly, hand tightening around the worn neck of the guitar case as if it were an anchor. The street kept moving. Footsteps passed. A bus exhaled at the corner. Somewhere above, an air conditioning unit rattled like loose change in a jar. Dean Martin remained exactly where he was. No applause, no comment, no instinctive half-smile of recognition. Just stillness. It was enough to disrupt everything. The singer inhaled, preparing for the next line, and stopped. His eyes lifted, searching not the crowd, but the space directly in front of him. People always reacted. Even indifference had a texture. This was different. This was attention without demand. He studied the man standing there. The clean coat. The hat worn without effort. The way his hands rested, relaxed but alert, like someone used to being watched yet refusing to perform unless necessary. Recognition didn't arrive all at once. It crept in sideways. Not the face, the silence. Only one kind of listener waited like that. The singer's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. He didn't finish the verse. He let it fall apart instead. "Funny thing," he said quietly, voice roughened more by honesty than strain. "I used to sing that better than you." A few nearby heads turned. Someone snorted, expecting a joke. Dean didn't react. The man on the street glanced down, then back up, as if weighing whether to continue. "Long time ago," he added, softer. "Different rooms." The air between them tightened. Dean could hear what wasn't being said. The calculation, the pride still intact beneath layers of erosion. This wasn't a plea. It wasn't a provocation either. It was a statement meant to land only if the right person was standing there. Dean met his eyes. "Songs change," he said evenly. Not dismissive, not kind, just true. The singer nodded once, accepting that as permission to continue speaking or stop entirely. He chose speaking. Los Angeles, late 50s, session work. Names that never made marquees but filled vinyl sleeves in small print. He talked without chronology, offering fragments, overnight calls, charts slid across pianos, voices doubled and replaced without ceremony. A contract that promised longevity and delivered silence. A diagnosis explained in careful tones. Lungs that no longer obeyed rehearsal schedules. No self-pity, just facts, laid out like old gear on a table. "I don't sing for tips," he said, gesturing vaguely toward the open case. "They just happen." Dean glanced down. The coins looked untouched, accidental. He looked back up. "Why this song?" The man exhaled through his nose. Because it survived me. Traffic surged. The spell thinned. Someone brushed past Dean's shoulder, breaking the line between them. The singer cleared his throat, as if deciding whether to retreat behind the music again. Dean didn't rush it. He waited until the moment nearly passed. "There's a bar," he said, nodding toward the side street. "Not much of one. Quiet enough." Suspicion flickered, then something like resolve. The singer closed the case, not carefully, not harshly, just decisively. They walked without introduction, without confirmation. Two men moving off the street as if the conversation had simply been waiting for a darker room to continue. The bar sat half a block off the strip, hidden behind a pawn shop and a flickering sign that promised cold beer without enthusiasm. Inside, the light was low and undecorated, the kind that didn't flatter faces or invite conversation. A few men occupied the counter, their shoulders angled inward, guarding their glasses. No music played. That alone felt intentional. Dean Martin took the stool closest to the wall. Not the center. Never the center. He removed his hat and placed it beside him, a small ritual that signaled he wasn't passing through. The bartender glanced over, hesitated, then went back to wiping the same section of wood he'd been polishing all night. No recognition yet. Dean preferred it that way. The singer sat one seat away, close enough to talk, far enough to retreat. They ordered without looking at each other. Whiskey for Dean. Beer for the man who used to sing into microphones that smelled like electricity. The glasses arrived with a dull thud, grounding the moment. For a while, nothing happened. That silence wasn't empty. It pressed. It asked questions neither man rushed to answer. Dean felt it working its way under the practiced calm he wore like a tailored suit. This place stripped that off. Here, he wasn't a voice carried by orchestras. He was just another man listening for the right moment to speak. "I hate that song," the singer said suddenly, staring into his glass. Dean didn't turn. "You sang it anyway." "Because it's the last thing that didn't leave." He paused, jaw tightening. Everything else did. The words landed heavy, but clean. No theatrics. Dean understood that kind of confession, the sort offered without expectation of comfort. He took a measured sip, letting the burn do its work. "You ever wish," the singer continued, "that a song would just stop following you?" Dean considered the question carefully. He thought of rooms where applause came on cue, of laughter that arrived before the punchline finished forming. "Sometimes," he said, "but then I remember it's better than being forgotten." The singer huffed, not amused. "That depends who's doing the remembering." Dean didn't argue. Instead, he shifted slightly, lowering his voice. "I have a show tomorrow night." The man's eyes flicked over, sharp, defensive. "I don't do favors." "I didn't offer one." Dean kept his tone flat. "Just an invitation. Sit in the back. No name, no spotlight." "And then?" Dean met his gaze for the first time. "Then, nothing. Or something. No promises." That was the dangerous part. The absence of guarantees. For a man whose life had collapsed under broken ones, it was either an insult or a relief. The singer weighed it, thumb tracing a slow circle of condensation on the glass. "You don't even know if I can finish a song," he said. Dean nodded. "I know." The bartender finally looked up, recognition dawning too late to matter. Dean stood, setting cash on the counter. More than necessary, less than dramatic. He reached for his hat, hesitated, then left it where it was. "Tomorrow," he said simply. The singer didn't answer, but he didn't leave either. And that, Dean knew, was the closest thing to agreement a man like that would ever give. By the time the house lights dimmed the following night, Nothing looked unusual. The orchestra sat exactly where it always did, jackets crisp, instruments aligned with professional indifference. The audience filled the room in orderly waves, couples settling into familiar seats, regulars nodding to ushers they recognized by name. Cigarette smoke hovered just beneath the ceiling, caught in the warm glow of stage lamps. It was another full room, another controlled evening. Backstage told a different story. Dean Martin stood near the narrow corridor that led to the wings, jacket already on, tie loosened just enough to breathe. A stagehand passed, then doubled back, voice lowered. They didn't sign off on anything extra tonight. Dean nodded once. No surprise. Another man, management, union, some invisible authority that thrived on rules, added quietly, "If something goes sideways, it's on you. All of it." No threats. None were needed. Dean lit a cigarette he didn't plan to finish. Around him, the orchestra tuned in fragments, isolated notes, cautious slides, the sound of men preparing for something they believed they understood. Control lived here. Schedules, cues, predictability. Dean had built his career inside that structure. Tonight, he was testing how much of it he could break without everything collapsing. 20 minutes before the final number, he glanced toward the rear of the house. The seat he'd mentioned was empty. He checked again from a different angle. Nothing. No familiar coat. No guarded posture. No sign that the man from the street had even entered the building. A quiet realization settled in. The hardest stage to face isn't the one with lights. It's the one you've already lost once. Dean crushed the cigarette into a tray that hadn't been emptied in hours. He felt the weight of the decision fully now. If the man didn't show, there would be no graceful explanation. Only an absence. And that absence would belong to Dean alone. For a moment, he considered reverting, finishing strong, giving them exactly what they paid for. The room would leave happy. The risk would dissolve into a footnote no one else ever read. The thought passed. He adjusted his cuffs, listening as the MC's voice echoed faintly through the speakers. Applause swelled. It was time. As he stepped toward the light, Dean made a quiet calculation. Not about success, but about responsibility. If nothing happened, he would carry it openly. The show moved smoothly, almost mockingly so. Laughter landed where expected. The orchestra followed every gesture. The audience relaxed into familiarity, unaware they were approaching a fault line. Behind the curtain, Dean waited for the final cue. Still no sign. He exhaled slowly, feeling the absence settle into resolve. Whatever came next, silence, confusion, backlash, would not be shared. He would stand in it alone. And for the first time in years, that felt honest. The applause at the end of the set came right on time. Polite at first, then fuller, rolling forward the way it always did when an audience sensed the evening was reaching its expected conclusion. Faces turned toward the stage with the comfortable certainty of routine. They were ready for the final number, the familiar cadence, the clean exit. Dean Martin stepped forward and didn't deliver it. He raised his hand toward the orchestra, not sharply, not dramatically, just enough. The musicians stopped mid-motion, bows hovering, breath held in trained confusion. A ripple moved through the front rows. This wasn't part of the act. Everyone could feel that immediately. Dean didn't smile. He didn't offer a joke to soften the interruption. No playful apology. He said only a few words, spoken plainly, without setup or explanation. They weren't instructions so much as a pause made audible. The room tightened. People shifted in their seats. Programs rustled. Someone near the aisle leaned back, arms folding instinctively. The audience was used to being guided. never left alone with uncertainty like this. Dean had always held the moment firmly. Tonight, he loosened his grip. From the side entrance, a figure stepped into view. Not from the wings, not announced, just appearing where no one was meant to appear from. The man wore no suit, no polish. His jacket hung wrong on his shoulders, as if borrowed from a better life. He carried nothing in his hands, not even confidence. The contrast was immediate and uncomfortable. This wasn't a guest star. This was an intrusion. Murmurs surfaced, then faded. Confusion overtook curiosity. A few expressions hardened. Someone coughed sharply, irritated. Dean did nothing to correct it. He didn't introduce the man. Didn't explain why he was there. Didn't frame the moment in language the audience could digest safely. He simply stepped aside, one measured pace back. Then stillness. For the first time that night, the center of the stage belonged to someone else. The singer stopped under the lights, blinking once as his eyes adjusted. The room felt enormous now, the silence louder than any orchestra. He stood with his hands at his sides, chest rising unevenly. The distance between him and the audience stretched thin and unforgiving. Dean watched from the edge, acutely aware of what he had surrendered. If the man failed, if the voice broke, if fear won, there would be no way to spin it. No charm to rescue the moment. The responsibility would land squarely where Dean had placed it, on himself. The singer inhaled, not deeply, carefully. And on that first sound, bare, unguarded, slightly off-center, the room leaned forward without realizing it. The first note landed lower than anyone expected. Not disastrously so, just enough to unsettle the ear trained on perfection. It hovered in the room, unsupported by strings or brass, naked in its imperfection. The singer held it briefly, then released it before his breath ran out. The sound didn't bloom. It thinned. A subtle shift moved through the audience. Not warmth, not rejection. Caution. He continued without accompaniment, voice rough where it used to glide. The phrasing bent under pressure, consonants arriving late, vowels shortened by necessity. This wasn't the song people remembered. It wasn't even the song they loved. It was something pared down to what remained after the body set limits. Dean Martin stood off to the side, hands loose at his sides, gaze fixed forward. He heard the movement before he saw it. Chairs creaking as people adjusted, a whisper cut short, a single cough echoing too loudly in the gap between lines. These were the sounds of an audience reassessing its patience. For the first time that night, Dean felt the sharp edge of doubt. This wasn't building toward applause. There was no swell, no cue for emotion. The silence pressing in was not reverent. It was evaluative. He realized then that he had misjudged something. Not the man, but the room. He had placed a fragile truth inside a space conditioned for polish. There was nothing he could do now. No quip to redirect attention. No gesture to summon the orchestra and soften the landing. He had stepped out of the machinery entirely. Whatever happened next would not be managed. The singer reached the second verse and slowed even further. Not from weakness, from choice. He let whole pieces of the melody fall away, speaking some lines instead of singing them, shaping the song into something closer to confession than performance. The rhythm dissolved, time stretched. It sounded less like music and more like a man standing alone with a memory he no longer trusted to carry him. The audience grew still again, but differently this time. Not leaning back, leaning inward. Bodies held tension without knowing why. Breath synced unintentionally with the uneven cadence on stage. Dean watched the transformation with quiet intensity. This wasn't redemption. It wasn't triumph. It was exposure. The singer's voice cracked, not dramatically, not to elicit sympathy, but because the moment demanded more air than his lungs could give. He didn't correct it. He didn't apologize. He continued as if that fracture belonged there. By the final line, the room felt suspended. No one moved. No one prepared to clap. The last word didn't arrive. He stopped just before it, mouth closing gently, sound cut short. The silence that followed was heavier than anything that had come before. The silence did not resolve itself. It lingered, uncomfortably precise, as if the room were holding its breath and refusing to release it first. 1 second passed. Then another. The singer remained where he stood, eyes lowered, not waiting for approval, not bracing for rejection. He had already given what he had. There was nothing left to adjust. No applause came. Not yet. This was not failure. But it wasn't victory either. It was assessment. The kind that happens when people realize they've been asked to witness something without instructions on how to respond. From the edge of the stage, Dean Martin made no move toward the center. He didn't approach the man. He didn't reach out. He didn't signal the orchestra or acknowledge the audience's confusion. Cameras would have found him if he had, but he stayed exactly where he was, half turned away from the light. Instead, he did something smaller. He loosened his shoulders and slipped out of his jacket, carefully, without flourish. The fabric made a faint sound as he folded it once and placed it over the back of a nearby chair. No gesture, no explanation, just an action that, to anyone who knew the rules of that world, carried a quiet weight. It meant, I'm not performing now. It meant, this moment doesn't belong to me. The singer glanced over, noticing the movement only in his periphery. Their eyes met briefly, not in gratitude, not in relief. Just recognition, an understanding that whatever happened next would happen honestly. Then, from somewhere near the back of the room, a single pair of hands came together. Not loud, not confident, just one person deciding not to wait any longer. The sound cut through the tension like a crack in glass. Another followed, then another. Slowly, unevenly, applause assembled itself, not rising, not swelling, but accumulating. It didn't rush. It didn't demand attention. It spread the way rain does when no one is watching for it. People stood, not because they were instructed to, but because remaining seated suddenly felt inadequate. The singer did not bow. He did not smile. He simply nodded once, barely perceptible, then stepped back into the shadow he had come from. After the show, there were no remarks, no explanations offered to reporters, no anecdotes saved for interviews. Dean left the building without comment, his jacket folded over his arm, his expression unchanged. Weeks later, a contract arrived in a plain envelope at a modest address. Not for a record deal. Not for a return to the stage. It offered work-shaping vocal arrangements, quiet labor, anonymous, valued for understanding rather than visibility. It bore no famous signature, no traceable generosity, only an opportunity. And in that absence of credit, the truth settled cleanly. Songs do not belong to the men who make them famous. They belong to the ones who sing them when fame can no longer answer back.